big, they're too smart, there's too much on the line, but it's not clear that their path is going to be linear. I think, again, to the topic of this panel, I think Apple has a much clearer linear path to success in mobile, right? Apple comes out and says, we are a mobile devices company. We have the coolest device on the planet. We have the most fluid distribution model, and to heck with everyone else in the ecosystem that wants to mess with us, right? We're going to bully the carriers into making sure that things are done our way. We're going to control the environment. We're going to spend $300 million a year in marketing to convince people that they need to be downloading Rob's app specifically. Apps. Sorry.
Well, as a case in point to that, Apple makes more money from 3% of the cell market than Nokia makes with 30%. So, you know, that's their same product model with their laptops. They own 90% of the computer market over $1,000, and that's apparently where they choose to stay and let Google wander throughout all ranges of prices and categories, and you know, they have their sandbox perfectly set up, and that.
So, sort of the one item I definitely agree with here, sort of a long-term, you know, prediction would be that more of this certain apps, particularly free ones that aren't looking to monetize through being a one-time fee or paid subscription, will end up moving back towards the web, depending on what the capabilities of HTML5 are. Just because either Flash on mobile or the web, the level of effort around native app development, even for iPhone and Android, is still so much higher than web development.
So you think a mobile-specific site might usurp the app in a certain...
I wouldn't say usurp, but I think it will have a long and fruitful, ongoing sort of life. The web,
many
the web
people
on
and companies
beyond apps
don't really realize or haven't acknowledged that their website may not work on most smartphones. They'll hit immediately flash wall.
Or you're left panning around on a site that was really intended for a 17-inch monitor.
Right. So
but in the end,
the definite sticking point of Apple doesn't think that Flash is going to continue. They feel no need.
They're actively trying to kill it.
Yeah, they feel no need to include it on their pad, and Android, you know, thinks that the 10.1 Flash will be part of their system and the way that they develop apps and ongoing. So that's another definite spear tip between the two.
I mean, to be honest, in the end, you know, one of the reasons we exist is because, you know, companies who want to make their websites look nice on all the mobile devices is still quite a hard thing to do. But I think, you know, with convergence, with things like the iPad and with the laptops getting smaller and the sort of the mobile devices getting bigger, LG's putting some little mini projectors on their devices. You know, there's, you know, as I said, with the head-up displays and things. Really, you'll be able, if people are developing for the web, that'll be viewable over the mobile. I mean, it's a real issue that you have to pan, but people are going to try and solve that. And when that does get solved, you know, then it becomes way more important, you know, to the content companies, because it's really the content that you're looking at. It's not, you know how much they're, you know, squashed. And so I think that, you know, and don't forget that, you know, Apple and Google do play nice with each other. Apple's got, you know, YouTube loaded on the iPhone, and they've got, you know, got the Google browser and everything. So it's, you know, I think that there is room for everyone to, you know, to play around in. But I think as the devices, big devices get smaller and small devices get bigger, that's where it's all going to get a bit blurry, and it won't be apps or webs. It'll be little, you know, collections of web services that do a task for you, like find a dog, you know, pet store,
and,
or, you know.
Well, Robert,
and this year there is going to be a lot of that blurring. There will be probably Android devices that are the same size as, almost the same size as a Slate device that's running Windows 7, and we'll probably see that this year. And there will be sort of a lot of questions of, should I be presenting it in an app or in the web from my regular website, a mobile website, some sort of Flash application? There's going to be a lot of overlap.
So this continue to be a difficult thing to design and implement in so many different platforms.
It's an expensive thing to do from a publisher standpoint. We have a fairly good dedicated staff at the Times, a little bit of outsourced help, but it's not all going to be solved with a magic bullet today or tomorrow, and sort of regardless of what our relative leanings are with success for iPhone or Android or RIM or Windows Mobile, whatever they might be, we're probably going to be left with developing for multiple platforms for a while.
Azim, did you want to?
No, I was just saying, I mean, this circularity is something that's certainly not uncommon, right? I mean, we see, we've seen it before with new platforms that come out. You see a very localized, software distribution, strategy that tends to evolve. And so, I mean, the desktop is an obvious, kind of go-to point to. I mean, we've seen a lot of desktop software sort of become browser-fied. And
Software as service, would you call that?
Right, exactly. And
SAS is a common acronym.
It's all a function
You might hear a lot of that, yeah.
It's all a function of a lot of the things that we just discussed, of bandwidth and of, the transmission cost of distribution and all these types of things. And as that marginal cost goes lower and lower, then, you get things like, Android apps that are basically web apps that run off of basically Google Web Services and things like that.
So to backtrack just for 1 second, most people probably don't know that Google pays $100 million a year, it may be more now, to be the default search engine on the iPhone, right? Could the unthinkable happen? Could Bing be the default search engine on the tablet or the iPad?
Word in the inner circles of the mobile and tech community is that Eric Schmidt is akin to the devil himself in the executive rooms at Apple. So and $100 million a year is an inconsequential amount of revenue to Apple, right? They've got $40 billion in the bank right now.
And no debt.
They're generating revenue and margins like they've never seen. They could, look, it's meaningful, but they really, from a strategic perspective, couldn't particularly care whether or not they got that. I think if there were an opportunity for them to unseat Google from all of their products and services, they'd leverage it. And the reason you're hearing rumors about them potentially doing a deal with Bing is because they're off talking to Microsoft, right? There's no mystery to that. Everybody talks to everybody in the technology sphere and in business in general, right? You assess your competitors, you look for alliances, you look for ways to transform or move a market. Undoubtedly, they're talking to the Microsoft team, and if Microsoft can deliver a compelling product with a user experience that matches the needs of Apple in the iPhone ecosystem, and if they can test it with consumers, and consumers are fine recognizing that the results fundamentally look the same, right? I don't know how many of you have, I guess it's a verb now, binged before?
Yeah, I like Bing.
So it's not a secret blood pact to pay back Bill Gates when he loaned Steve Jobs money and Apple's darkest hour.
I think that battle died a long time ago. I think that the real fight is the right one for this panel now. It's right.
Okay.
It's Apple versus Google, and Microsoft sort of over here saying, "Well, I want to fight too," but nobody's really listening.
Hit me. Okay, that was one of our main questions, is to affirm where the others who were perhaps the giant at the time. Anyone have a comment about Dell, or they're trying to get into the mobile arena, seriously into it?
Or what happened to RIM?
I don't think they'll do it unless they come up with a device which is, as I said again, if they come up with a device which is way cooler, or if they can integrate it into your ear somehow, or make it much easier, then you can. I mean, Apple didn't play in the mobile game a while ago, and then suddenly everyone here's got that phone. So that
it's under 3 years, which is,
I mean, that can
unbelievable to think it's so short. I mean, a 2-year contract now is almost an eternity.
Yeah.
Which I was to the comment I was trying to tease out about the unlocked Android device, where you can change yearly or less than yearly for the next greatest thing.
All of those contracts where you're locked into AT&T, I mean, I just don't see them carrying on for too much longer. And I know that there's a lot of money involved, but that really people don't like that.
They definitely wouldn't like the elimination of unlimited data plans, which I think that would, if AT&T brought that out or Verizon brought it out, it would get so much public outcry to try to reel in or choke off the streaming.
There's a great opportunity for a little bit of patriotism or nationalistic pride there. The U.S. mobile community has gotten beaten up for years with Europeans and Asians saying, you know what, we're so much further ahead. We innovate faster. We're more tightly integrated. You can buy a can of Coke with your mobile phone. I challenge anyone to show me the company that's making a ton of money off of those particular microtransactions. But what we have here and where we've led the world is in unlimited data plans. That's us. We started that. We started that trend, and that's the reason that we've seen the really significant adoption of data-hungry devices, because it's just cheap to do so. You're seeing other companies jump on board, but that was the U.S. first.
And I would say that, I mean, that's the same. We used to, I mean, just to fight my corner. I mean, we came from, you know, Australia and Europe, where you know, for a long time it was quite cool to get up and go, we're bigger than America, haha. But to be honest, they are, and I would say that it's probably last year even, maybe. I mean, the iPhone was the thing that did it, and it's not just that, it's the capital markets here, it's the funding for all of the companies. I mean, there are companies like yours in Australia who just would get nowhere. They don't get the funding, they don't get the scale, and then they kind of, you can't innovate, and that can't work in those places. And I think it's largely because of the venture capital community here. But the unlimited data balance is true. I mean, a lot of our stuff was choked every time we did something for any of the, you know, somebody like the New York Times or News Limited. You know, there was always a massive big issue with how much are you going to get charged for the data, and how much is that, and then you had to put little signs saying you're going to get charged for this data. And you know, it is kind of peculiar here that you pay when you receive calls and text messages, which is kind of funny. But you're right, it is. They have overtaken, and I think that's kind of that's kind of important. And that's why we came here, because it's, you know, I think all the cool stuff outside of Japan, which is kind of off on its own, doing really amazing things that no one else will probably ever do. But ex-Japan, I think America is going to be the big, you know, the big driver of innovation.
Luke, do you have a particular success story for your company you'd like to share?
I mean, originally when we first started working, we were one of the first companies who could resize, you know, sites to mobile devices. And then, you know, following that, a year later, we were one of the first guys in 2003 who were able to take a picture with a mobile and send that to a server. And then we did that for Big Brother. And that was kind of before UGC was really big. And if you look at, you know, some of the, you know, if you follow that forward, when the iPhone 3GS came out, YouTube submissions went up 400%. So it is the device that does that. And I think it's always been very important, and that's why we've had the Innovation Lab to do that. But it is getting harder and harder to innovate, because there's so much, especially now that America's caught up, all the innovation's happening here. So doing new things, I mean, a lot of the work we're doing now with companies with the iPad, because the iPad is very new, so everyone's very interested in it. But we're not, you know, whereas before we were maybe the first in the market, now there's a whole load of people. I mean, you guys are doing it yourselves, and, you know, we're doing it for a number of other companies. But I think that, you know, unless you're, you know, Oxford Molecular Labs or like the Cambridge guys I was talking about, it's difficult to be at the very edge, you know. And so in a way, it's just about being, you don't have to be there anyway. You just have to be, you know, a little bit behind it and do things a little bit better, like, you know, kind of like Apple did. So that was, you know, where we ended up.
So what do you predict the first quantum mobile device will come out?
I mean, some of the stuff they're doing really is fascinating, you know, with all of that stuff. And if you go on, and the stuff you can see online really is 5 years ahead of where we are, and maybe even 10 years. But it's, you know, there's a couple of videos I saw recently with, you know, with some sort of really cool quantum mechanics where, you know, it was Nokia and Cambridge Labs, and it was, you know, a surface that could, you know, get bigger, and then it could raise up and get keys and then go down flat, and then you'd turn it all into a color and it looked just like your skin, and it was really, really cool. But that's all, you know, the very edge. And, you know, we spoke to one of the guys, augmented reality, who was working for a company there, and, you know, he'll do amazing work in one of these companies, and then Microsoft will take him and give him a massive salary, and then he'll kind of get put off to the side and not really innovate anymore. You know what I mean? We can't afford to hire him because he costs way too much, because Microsoft just hired him. And so in a way, you know, when we said, you know, there was a little Darth Vader running around the page was what they were doing. But the two guys who did that are now gone. And so in the end, you know, there is a sort of a loss of innovation, because really the places it happens are universities. And then as soon as the big companies get hold of it, it does kind of squash it. I mean, an interesting thing that I found when I spoke to a friend of mine who worked at Apple and Google, you think if you work for them, they're similar, you know, and they both give free lunches, and you think, wow, they're going to be the same. But and they really love that. You can decrease salaries by 10 grand and give 2 grand back in lunches, and they're somehow happy. I don't know how. We should probably start doing that. But he was saying that in Google it's all open and everyone's really kind of, you know, it feels really kind of free and really cool. Whereas Apple feels very kind of secret. And he was working on sort of computers where he would go to, you know, companies and say, this is what the roadmap is, you know, for Google. But for Apple, they never told anyone. And it's always, you know, very secret, and, you know, they don't tell any of the staff because they don't want to leak, and it's all the big releases that Steve Jobs does. Whereas, you know, Google is all kind of open and sort of playing nice. So I think it's, you know, while Apple is really amazing, let's not forget how bad Apple was when Steve Jobs wasn't at the helm. you know, and then he came back and it got really good again. So if he would accidentally, you know, die, you might see a very different Apple.
But in conjunction with that, many former Apple employees work at Palm, and they weren't really able to turn the company around, even though it had a fairly decent product and stuff, but it just kind of didn't have the magic. And that was one of my later questions, but where do you see, I mean, this battle is occurring right now with, you know, certain convergences of technology and storage, and been hearing for 25 years batteries are going to get better, but that's what I'm waiting for to happen. Everyone I see is a slave to a charger, or can borrow one, or can I plug in, or what have you.
They're looking at wireless battery charging. So
Yes,
soon
yeah.
it'll just.
And one thing, I didn't hear this from Google, but the reason you would get into a power transmission company is sending information in the magnetic wave around a power line. So you know, and then it transmits from small femtocells. I mean, it just gets ridiculous if you want to get into it. But so is there something that you see beyond, say, Sergey and Larry and Steve Jobs? You know, they've built these companies up to these huge juggernauts, and then once they are let go without those people, you know, if you're already considering Google a wandering giant, you know, what do you see some sort of, is there any, it's just too crazy to make a prediction now, but.
Well, one of the things that my friend at Apple said was that he said Steve Jobs is literally like a crazy genius. And he does, you know, there is a lot of autonomy there, and he is sort of, you know, put up as the main guy, and I think the culture is a lot of, you know, around him, whereas I think Google, especially as the two main guys have sort of moved off, they've almost got bigger, they're a bigger business, you know what I mean? Whereas I think that a lot of Apple's crazy genius is around Steve Jobs, but Google doesn't have that, it's sort of everywhere. It was kind of like when Americans first settled in America and they tried to fight the Apache Indians, they couldn't do it very easily because they were all sort of in little cells and operated independently. There was no sort of one guy at the top who they could, you know, go and kill, and then they'd own everyone. So I think that, and I think that
Never thought we'd go to Custer's Last Stand with this panel.
But Apple's like that, and Facebook, who I think's been forgotten in this discussion, is, you know, they've got Mark Zuckerberg as their main guy, and I think that, you know, that'll be an interesting, you know, I think when Steve Jobs leaves, it'll be interesting, because then Apple might become kind of a wandering company in itself.
Did anyone else want to comment on that? Or?
I mean, ultimately, a company ends up being defined by its leadership, because they set the policy, they pick the market directions, and then they influence their team and who it is that they want to hire and the sorts of things that they want to execute upon. So there's no question that any one of these companies, and you could argue that about any one of these buildings around us right now, would be a different entity without the current leadership at the helm. I think one of the things that Steve has done much better now than he was ever able to do before was hire in really smart people onto his leadership team. I mean, Steve takes the stage, but you meet the rest of the management team at Apple, and these are seasoned professionals, right? These are guys that have been in the trenches with him either in recent years at Apple or going back to his days at Next. I don't know how many of you remember, but Steve was fired from Apple because the company was tanking. And then he left and went to India and did a lot of drugs for a few years and found himself and came back and started up another little company called Next Computer, which was the company that built the operating system that's now on the iPhone and the operating system of Mac OS. I couldn't have been any less significant or lower on the totem pole, but I used to work for Next, and I would demo with Steve, and that company was the crucible for what's Apple today, where it was a whole bunch of really smart technologists and business people trying to figure out how it is to correct for the mistakes that early Apple made, which was all Apple all the time. Sorry.
Was he a crazy genius when you worked with him?
It's just his way. Leave genius, crazy, anything out of it. It's just, look, this is my company, this is my vision, and we're just going to do it this way, and you can like it or you can go work somewhere else.
Wow.
Or you
Can
can
that
like it and you
carry
can work
on?
somewhere else.
How good is that what you're like? That sounds amazing.
Well, I'd like to ask another question, and then we'll go to audience questions and remind everybody that there are mics spread apart throughout. So if you want to queue up to ask a question, but I didn't mean to interrupt. But I wanted to talk about monetization because I feel like that's a very important topic for our audience. In the app industry and advertising in general, but like what's working and what's not in general. And maybe Azim, you could talk to this we just like from a marketer standpoint, what are the best practices, top level kind of thing?
Sure. I think the quick answer to that is that we're still figuring that out. I mean, I think everyone is, and that's what's made it so exciting. The fact that, and I think this touches on something that you mentioned earlier. The reason why the App Store and the reason why the iPhone and these platforms have gotten so successful is that people can build businesses on top of them, and that's why we have hundreds of thousands of applications and just as many developers. In terms of the prominent business models that exist right now, we've definitely seen advertising work for a lot of developers. And when I'm referencing developers, I mean everyone from independent development shops of 2 people to larger companies. We definitely see advertising working as a revenue stream. We see selling apps working as a revenue stream. It all really depends on kind of what you're building, who you're building it for, what the actual form factor is. What type of value proposition are you building for the consumer? And that's with anything, right? And the more and more we're seeing developers become successful, the more and more everyone's realizing that it's really not about just coding up an app. It's about building a business and building a viable one at that, and publishing good software. And I think when there's so much hype and there's so much gold rush mentality, that such an obvious point gets easily lost in the fray. But once you have a good understanding of how you're attracting users, what you're building, then it becomes like any other business. And obviously the large acquisitions that you've seen with Quattro and AdMob from Google